Hello again, my name's Paul Gilbert, and we put together these talks to look at how compassion and training our minds in compassion can be helpful in these times of tragedy and trauma, but also as ways of how to live a life to focus on compassion for self and others, right? Okay, so in order to do that today, we're going to be looking at how to focus on a compassionate sense of self and start to build a compassionate mind. So once again, as you probably know the routine by now, I'm going to share my screen with you. Here we go. Share, share, share. Down there. And there we are. Okay. So once again, nature of compassion, the concept of safe relating, how we relate to ourselves and to others, and how we can use compassion to change the world. And now this talk is really going to be about how we can imagining our compassionate selves and how and why that's important. So examples of building a compassionate mind. In our last talk, I showed you ways in which you can learn breathing techniques, postural techniques, focusing techniques to allow your body just to settle and get your parasympathetic system working a bit. In this talk, we're going to be looking at imagery, and we're going to be looking at how we can use various techniques to focus in on becoming a compassionate mind and a compassionate self, okay? So let's just remind ourselves that compassion can be defined in many ways, but we see it as a motivation which is stimulated by the stress and suffering in self and others. We're sensitive, we turn towards it, we don't turn away, we don't close down, we don't push it away. We engage with it, we move towards it, and we work out the wisdom of what to do. Now, the wisdom and the dedication is very important. Okay, but catch up. Let my slides catch up with you. So here we are. Courage and the wisdom, very, very important, okay? So if I see somebody fall into a fast flowing river and I say, I must save them, so I jump in, but I can't swim, then I get swept away too. So wisdom is extremely important for compassion. Otherwise, it's just rushing in and not really always being very helpful. Okay, so that's important. So we need to understand then, what is the wisdom of compassion? How can we develop a wisdom of compassion? So we're going to have a look at that. Now, as we've seen in talk 2, compassion can involve many different skills, many different emotions, many different processes. These skills and the emotions of a firefighter or somebody on the front line of our medical services will be quite different from somebody who's maybe involved with counseling somebody who's dying, or somebody who is helping somebody fight injustice, right? So compassion is not one thing. We have different kinds of skills and different talents. What's very important, though, is for us to begin to think about, if we were at our compassionate best, if we could imagine ourselves at our compassionate best, what would we be like? What would be our personal key qualities, right? Now, you can do this for anything. You know, if you was to imagine yourself at your brightest, or you imagine yourself at your most optimistic, or you imagined yourself at your most courageous, just imagining how you would be, just focusing on that idea. Now, actors use this all the time because they have to imagine a character, and then when they imagine this character, how does that character speak? How would they think? How would they move? Then they gradually move into that character, right? Now, research has shown that when people start to do this, they do actually change the way they think and approach things. So we know that when people imagine themselves at their optimistic best, they would think about problems in a very different way than if they imagine themselves at their pessimistic worst, for example. They actually see their problems in different ways. There's a lovely study looking at people giving advice to themselves, and in one, they just gave advice to themselves. And in another situation, they imagine themselves as Sigmund Freud and giving themselves, and the Sigmund Freud, imagining yourself as Sigmund Freud, people actually gave themselves better advice. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? Quite interesting, fascinating. So here we are then. Firstly, let's begin to think about your own personal qualities that would make you feel you are at your compassionate best. Okay, so in order for us to do that, we're going to go into the body a little bit and then to imagine those qualities, imagine having those qualities, okay? So I'm going to invite you to have maybe 4 or 6 qualities and then choose 3, Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute, not very long, but you can do this more when you've got more time by yourself. So just sitting back in your chair then, okay, and now doing your 5 breaths per minute, grounding in the body, bringing your mind to a point of stability, and giving your mind an opportunity just to settle a little bit and think about the qualities that you would have, the way you would be if you were at your compassionate best. They could be anything. They could be patience or a good listener or whatever is important for you, whatever you think would make you the most compassionate person you could be. So just give yourself an opportunity just to think about those things for a moment. Okay. Now, the next thing is, don't worry if you think you couldn't be that. Okay. So, for example, someone might say, well, I'd like to imagine myself as a very patient person, but I know I'm not. I get irritated very quickly. Don't worry about that. Just imagine yourself as a patient person, even if you think you can't do it. Just practice imagining being a patient person, even if you think that I can't do that. That would be a quality that you think would be good for you in being a compassionate person. To just imagine being that, okay? Because you've got to give yourself a chance, right? Unless you give yourself a chance to practice patience, how are you ever going to become patient, right? So it's just practice, just practice. Okay, so choose 3 of your qualities that would make you into a compassionate person. The key qualities you think would make you the most compassionate person you can be. And they can be anything. Okay, so now just focusing on that, and you can do this looking down or with your eyes closed, whichever is useful to you. I'm going to give you 3 other qualities that are important for compassion. Now, it's a quality I talk a lot about, which is wisdom, okay? Now, the wisdom that you're going to use as your compassionate self is the wisdom from talk 2. Now, if you remember, in talk 2, we recognize that we all just find ourselves here. Our bodies and our brains have been built for us, not by us. A lot of what goes on in our bodies and our brains, we didn't choose at all. We didn't choose to be a man or a woman. We didn't choose to come into the world, grow old, and then die. We didn't choose any of this, did we, really? And we didn't choose a lot of the stuff that goes on in our minds in terms of our anxieties and our fears and our depressions and our joys and our lusts. It's all built in. Our job, as best we can, is to start to work out how our minds and brains work in order to drive it in such a way, or steer it in such a way that we can live to be helpful, not harmful. Because it's very easy for us to live quite harmfully, actually. That's not difficult for humans to do, unfortunately. So this is our wisdom, the wisdom of no blaming, but taking responsibility. Very important wisdom, very important wisdom. Okay, and then the next wisdom really is thinking about how we develop courage and strength. So imagining ourselves to have it. Okay, whether or not you feel you can or not, doesn't matter. The first point is just imagining that you have courage, you have the strength that you need. What would that be like? What would you be like? Okay. Now, I'm a scaredy cat, so of course, obviously, if I imagine it, it doesn't mean to say I think I'm always going to be able to be courageous, because I know sometimes I won't be. But at least I can practice imagining it. At least I can create that in my mind and try as best I can to get a little bit closer to being courageous. And so you practice that. You practice that. So you have the wisdom that we've all just found ourselves here. Nobody chose to be here, with a different genetic profile. And remember, I also mentioned about if I'd been kidnapped as a 3-day-old baby into a violent drug gang, I'd be very different. So we have this wisdom. And then the third element is commitment. And this commitment to try as best we can while we're on this mortal coil to live to be helpful, not harmful, recognizing that through no fault of your own, you can be harmful to yourself and to others. It's not your fault. You didn't choose to do that. Nobody wakes up usually, unless they feel very vengeful about something, to be harmful. We just happen. But if we learn how our minds work and we put our minds to the task of living to be helpful, not harmful, this can be very helpful. So you're going to create a sense of a compassionate self. You're going to create this vision of you as a compassionate self. And then each day, just practice imagining being that compassionate self. Simple as that, really. And we have a little exercise called 2 minutes under the duvet, which is that when you get out of bed, just imagine yourself, before you get out of bed, just spend 2 minutes imagining yourself as a compassionate self today. Excuse me, imagine going through the day as your compassionate self, thinking about what you've got to do, thinking about, as my compassionate self, this is how I would do it. I've got this difficult meeting to come up, but if I was to walk in there, breathing, grounded, feeling clear in my mind, with wisdom and courage, this is how I would be. If I was to walk in there to stay friendly, centered, not let my minds be pushed all over the place with anger or whatever it is, or I could just stay in this position, this is how I would be, right? So you start to practice thinking about, if I could be like this, this is how I would be. Now, that doesn't mean to say you will be like that, because it's often very difficult to be like that, but you've got a focus, you've got an idea, and that will begin to, if you practice this, this can be very helpful. The next thing is that when you're practicing compassion, being a compassionate person, learning how to be friendly. And this can be quite straightforward, just that when you walk down the street, what do you want people to see in your face, right? How often do you smile at people? How often do you nod at people? How often do you say thanks for people who've helped you in a genuinely friendly way? You know, the person that serves you coffee or whatever it is, you know, at least when we get to go out and get coffee, of course. So learning about the nature of compassion, thinking about the qualities you would have if you were a compassionate person, and practicing living those qualities just a little bit like an actor, little bit each day. This can be extremely valuable for all of us, really. And over time, you will find that you will gradually slip into it. So what I would say then is that when you're developing your sense of your compassionate self, you're creating an idea of your compassionate self, go small steps and try to notice just small changes. Maybe you handle that meeting just a little bit better. Maybe you did that just a little bit better. Okay, so small steps and small changes are often the way in which we can move forward. And having an idea of how you would like your compassionate self to be can be very helpful. Now, there's one exercise that you can try, which will also help you see that we can deliberately change our psychological focus by changing our orientation, changing our mind. Now, in this one, what you would do is you would bring to mind something that's causing you a little upset. Nothing too heavy, nothing too much, but something that's causing you a worry or an upset. And spend a minute or two just thinking about your worry or upset from the emotion of the worry or upset. So if you're anxious, think about it with your anxious mind. What does your anxious mind think? How does it see this worry and upset? Or if it's your angry mind, how does your angry mind see this worry and upset? And just notice how that part of you thinks and feels. And then, when you've done that for a minute or two, not too long, just to get a feel for it, then sit in the chair, shoulders back, engage in your breathing, get that vagus working, and now imagine that you are at your compassionate best, right? Just imagine you have those qualities, you're grounded in the body, you're settled in the mind. You have a courage and a wisdom. You understand life is very difficult. None of us chose to be here. Okay, we're all trying our best. We've got a mind that's really tricky. Call it tricky mind. So you bring this wisdom. Now you bring your idea way ideal way of dealing with this particular difficulty. Now, what you may find when you give yourself a chance to do that, ground in your body, settle in your mind, focus on your intention to bring your greatest wisdom, your greatest compassion to this problem, you might find you see the problem in a different way. Maybe only just slightly. Maybe you get a different perspective. Maybe you have a different insight. The point is, notice any small change between thinking like from this position as opposed to your angry or your anxious mind. When you get the hang of that, then you start to recognize how and why it's very useful for us to deliberately switch into our compassionate mind as often as we can with our breathing and our grounding, our friendliness and our orientation, to use our wisdom, to use our courage to be helpful and to address suffering wherever we see it, to live for others, to support others. That is the way in which we will eventually change the world. We will live for the benefit of others. We will all create a compassionate mind, and the compassionate mind will be through all of us. Wouldn't that be amazing? Okay, so thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again about emotions, how to look at and work with our emotions in our next talk.